Hello, everybody. Welcome to WD Carousel of Podcast. My name's Crystal.
And I'm Ian.
And today we are going to do a little bit of history. We're going to call it the evolution of hybrid movies because that sounds a lot more eloquent. I mean, I didn't know how else to phrase this.
I get that.
I was trying to figure out what the actual title is to these types of movies, and most of the time when I googled hybrid movies, the hybrid movie from 2014 came up. Which
sometimes research is annoying.
Yeah, that's just like a rated D level, don't know.
Yeah.
But it's not a good one. It's just no.
So we're going to cover that today. No, I'm sorry.
Not quite. But what we're talking about is we're talking about the crossover between live action movies and animated movies, and the evolution of them, the process of them. Might nerd out a little bit on technique, and yeah, because they've been going on a heck of a lot longer than I thought they would.
Right.
So
yeah.
I mean,
you want to dive in? I don't even know where to start.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm like looking at my notes and I'm like, so back in 1900, legit that
right?
year,
Legit.
Not in the 1900s, but 1900, there was a silent movie that came out that was called The Enchanted Drawing. And this is the first like noted hybrid movie, if we want to call it that. And the premise of it is it's a silent movie, so there's no sound. But there is an actor who has a huge pad of paper next to him in front of an audience, and he's drawing this face to interact with. And he'll do things like, hand him a drink, light a cigarette. There was like part with a hat. Took the cigar away, and so then the face became sad, but it was very like rudimentary sort of drawing, so we're talking almost stick figure like in the just face, so it wasn't even like a full body, it was just the head of a random male that was on that piece of paper that the live actor was interacting with at that time. And that's kind of really the
impetus for the whole deal.
Yeah, it started all this off. And how they did this was stop motion animation. So because it was a movie, they decided that they were going to do a recording of the actors' motions. And then they had that not little, it was a huge basically legal pad. I don't know why I keep thinking legal pad, but like one of those huge white pads of paper on an easel next to them, and then like handed off items to it and then took items back. And so what they did in the actual like finishing of the film was just draw on the legal pad that had just been sitting there to interact appropriately per cell of movie to interact.
Frame by frame.
Yeah,
basically,
that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, what they typically do with this, and I guess my most famous favorite in my brain of stop motion is probably Wallace and Gromit. Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean it's just quintessential Aardman. Yeah, that's claymation with stop motion. They sit there and they have their film movie camera. And instead of turning it on, they just advance frames. So they just sit there and go, okay, take 3 shots. And they just like basically build the movie frame by frame from scratch, which is just insanity to think about. It takes like 3 times as long to do anything when you're doing stop motion.
Yeah. So this one was based off of stop motion animation. So I don't know if, I don't think that they were... I don't think they actually drew on the cells at the time. I think it was actually like they stopped filming, drew the face,
and they changed it, and then did the next one.
Yeah, and then restarted filming, and then just had that back and forth going on.
Yeah.
I don't know.
it's a neat. It's definitely like when people started to understand that you could stop a frame and change something between that and the next frame, like that was a complete game changer in terms of editing and special effects. Like it was a big deal. I'm going to try to not go full nerd on this because I could, and I won't.
Oh yeah. I mean, we're getting into this episode knowing that the film nerd that is my co-host will be very happy to talk about technicals. Let's move on to the next one. In 1914, there was the, I want to say like introduction of Gertie the dinosaur. And Gertie the dinosaur was actually a vaudeville act. So there was a live person on stage in front of an audience that would then play this hand-drawn animation, again, black and white, lots of stick figures, movie about a dinosaur. And using certain like cues on screen, the actor knew what the dinosaur was gonna do, so could play up the, oh Gertie, don't eat that tree, you must be hungry, and blah 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 blah. Or if you're listening to me, lift your right paw and wave to the audience, and that sort of thing. So I mean, it was definitely like a vaudeville act. So a lot of people were wowed by this and thought that there was an actual interaction going on between the live person and this drawn dinosaur, but it had to do with a lot more nerddom.
right. Being able to, so basically they had timed ways that allowed the live person to understand what the animated thing was doing next.
So like keyframes, registration marks, they used tracing paper on the on the film that was made. They did animation loops. I mean, this was taking the next step to being able to interact in IRL. In real life. Yeah. But still, the element that was missing was the true first hybrid, which we will talk about as in 1918. So seriously, again, not too far off of, everything going on. Still pre-sound. There was Out of the Inkwell, which was a Coco the Clown. Now, Coco was actually just this little happy-looking clown. Don't think evil, scary clown that would like the size of a mouse and would explore the real world around him. And this is one where they actually invented the rotoscope. So projecting, making the movie and then actually doing the animation on top of the film cells. So I was incorrect the first time, and this is where it is now. I'm not a film junkie like you are.
I know. Well, to be fair, like I didn't know that time frame either. So like,
So what they did for the rotoscope is that they projected the film through an opening in the easel that was covered by a glass pane to draw on the surface. So kind of like one of those light boxes, but it actually had, the film behind it. Yeah. So that way they could do one frame at a time, trace out the actions of Coco on top of the live action movie that already existed.
Yeah.
So
the rotoscoping is like, even in like the digital world, like when they call it usually masks in digital systems now, like that I use, but a lot of times they'll still call it a rotoscope because it's like the same thing where you have to like cut out stuff with different mats and stuff. And they that's like what they still call it, even though there's nothing to do with the original process. It's just how they refer to it.
Well, it's an old timey vernacular. That we enjoy. It's
just like how all of our save, like save buttons are all still a floppy disk.
Floppy disks. And it's a 3-inch floppy. Get it right.
Yeah, this is true. This is true.
It's not a bigger floppy.
Not right.
And then it finally leads us to Laugh-O-Gram, aka what eventually became the Walt Disney Company, and their 1923 release of the Alice Comedies. And the Alice Comedies were the first time that they actually took a live action actor and put her inside of an animation. So everything else kind of was in the real world, and then they had animation within it. in some aspect. So the Alice comedies really made the step forward into going into imagination and being able to explore areas that where physics doesn't exist and all of these like imaginary creatures don't exist, and you can totally like the world is your oyster at that point in time. And it was through Walt Disney, Ub Iwerks, and a whole bunch of other people through Laugh-O-Gram Films that created the technique, which is basically a white screen that they had the actress act out a scene in front of, maybe one or two props to like jump off of or, slide down, that sort of thing. But because they used a white background, they were able to actually go in and hand animate each one of those cells that were recorded.
Yeah.
Being able to put them into
I think that's that's something I actually wasn't sure of. So they actually drew directly onto each actual frame. Is that how they did that?
I believe so. Now, those who are nerds about this can go ahead and yell at me in the comments about how I got this wrong. But I know that it was basically their first take version of what we know now known as green screen.
Yeah. So they actually would have called this technically a luminance key, because it's totally bright. If I remember, so if they didn't do compositing, which they maybe didn't at this point because it was kind of early, but if they used like an optical printer and did compositing, like you could have used that blown out white background as a way to isolate the actress. But I don't know that they had done that yet. They might have just been like, all right, well, this is a blank slate for us to work on.
I feel like we might have covered that a little bit in our Ub Iwerks episode.
We did. Yeah.
But, if you want to know more about that, then maybe go listen to that
episode. We were smarter back then.
My notes didn't translate that over here because I was more focused on the movies.
Yeah, well, that's fair.
So 1923... Alice comedies, first time actually taking a live action human and putting them into
which is
a completely different world.
Pretty complicated, to be honest.
Very much so. There had been other movies that started popping up with this. Nowhere is it only the Disney company that did hybrid movies, but they're the only ones that I found, especially early on, that actually did feature-length films versus shorts or, educational films, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Speaking of educational films, there was the 1941 release of The Reluctant Dragon, which is a Disney film. It's one that a lot of people are not familiar with because essentially The Reluctant Dragon is a feature film that's a behind the scenes of the animated process.
Right. It was sort of like a animation. It was a tour of pretty much their new studio, right? I mean, more or less.
Kind of, but not as a here's this room and then on the left we're going to have. No, it was an animated or a story maker who tried to sell his story or his wife told him he needed to sell his story to Disney about The Reluctant Dragon, and had an appointment and she dropped him off and drove away, so he had to stay there. He was kind of.
This seems like somebody that I would be married to. Just like do the thing and just leave.
And so he's basically there. They put a kid on him to basically bring him to Walt, and he keeps like avoiding and evading the kid and ends up hiding in all these different little rooms. But they talk about the animation process, they talk about hybrid processes, they do music, and they have the orchestra, they have recording of voice animations, they do the folio room, they go through the multiplane camera room. They go very in depth into all of this. And spoiler alert, at the end, like he runs into Walt that is in one of the preview rooms where it happens to be playing The Reluctant Dragon. The story that he was coming in because his wife gave Walt all the info already. And
that's funny. I know I did not have a chance. I'll level with you guys. I did not have a chance to watch this, but I did do a little bit of research before we recorded today. And a fun fact that this is something that I feel like, since we're a podcast that looks at the holistic aspects of Disney, like the whole picture, not just little pieces of it, this was actually released right around the time they were having the animator strike. So it was sort of Disney, like Walt Disney's like propaganda film to get people on a sympathetic term with the Walt Disney Company. Yeah. It was like a thing, and they also just built a new studio. So it was like, it kind of worked out that way. But yeah, that was certainly an aspect of it. Just something interesting.
Yeah. And you can find it on Disney Plus. I'd seen it there, and it's a fun way to get to know the behind the scenes of an animated movie, hybrid movie, whatever might have any sort of illustration in it.
Parks 1990. I'm sorry. Sorry, I'll stop.
There's a whole list from here of movies now that have the occasional side hybrid to it, so it might not be the primary focus of the film. Like Fantasia, you see Mickey running up to the conductor. Three Caballeros has Donald flirting with a salsa dancer. I mean, there's Song of the South has
Donald.
The Bluebirds talking to Uncle Remus, and zippity doo daying all over the place. And then we'll get into like 1959, which is actually the first real movie that they took hybrid in a different aspect within the Walt Disney Company. And that was Darby O'Gill and the Little People. So you're not going to find the, hand-drawn animation at that point in time. It wasn't, obviously 2D character put in a 3D world, but they used a lot of the same techniques, and they were really advancing.
They were using the techniques they had learned for animation and were able to apply it to the words there. Then they were able to apply it to doing like actual special effects for like a live action film, which is an interesting
the green
application.
Screen again, and they had to have like the actors acting out their little leprechaun roles in front of like a big blank screen in the back, and that they then superimposed another actor pretending to be the human, reacting with everybody. And I know that had a big hand with that forced perspective and hybriding the movie that way too. So that's where they really got into basically special effects CGIs, pre-CGI CGIs.
Yes, exactly. It's like, exactly. It was compositing in like what would become like the final current computer compositing form, except they were doing it with no computers, which is unbelievably interesting to me.
And then comes Mary Poppins.
Classic.
So 1964, everybody knows, hopping into the sidewalk chalk paintings and having the dancing penguins. And a lot of those movies have stuck, in our hearts, whether it be Mary Poppins, Bedknob and Broomsticks, Pete's Dragon. All of those guys had interactive characters that, were able to communicate with the actors, and it was just it's the hybrid movies that we grew up with, that we know and love.
That we know.
And then they took it to the next level.
Tron.
Yes, 1982 Tron.
Oh my god.
So not the most recent Tron.
No.
A hybrid movie is still live action plus
plus animation.
And so this is where they really started getting into like computer graphics and trying to figure out how to hybrid the newest technology of animation into real world and live action situations.
Right. And that one was computer generated, right? To a certain degree,
but they still had, they had the faces that were live action. They had the actions that were live action, the costumes that were live action.
But those scenes were like the backgrounds. A lot of them were generated.
Yeah. So the backgrounds were generated. The motorcycles were generated. There were just a lot of different like disc things. And I mean, it was a hybrid movie, but it was the next level.
Next thing.
It was trying to make you feel like you were in the middle of the video game.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, suspend that disbelief that this is not possible because it doesn't exist and it's not real.
Right.
And
right.
It's the first movie that I saw evidence of them doing this kind of hybriding.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
Still ranks up there a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Have you seen it recently?
I haven't seen the original recently.
It is absolutely the cheat. Like, I saw it probably in the last 2 years. It is just like, wow, this is crazy. I mean, it's like, you kind of have to just love it because it's so unbelievably like far-fetched in, you know what I mean? Like, to a certain degree, but it's so funny. I enjoy it. Also, a very young Jeff Bridges always makes me laugh. He's a bundle of joy. So,
video games for spring. Groundbreaking. Yeah. Sorry.
Groundbreaking. Yeah.
Totally different, whatever. Just ignore me. And then we'll just talk about the Cadillac of hybrid movies. 1988.
The Rolls Royce of
Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Yeah.
Now there's a couple of reasons why this, even though it seems like, yeah, they've been doing the same sort of thing for years now. No, this is like the highlight. This is the best. I'm going to put it on that pedestal of hybrid movies.
I don't think anyone would disagree with you on that. If they do, I would love to hear their thoughts on that. But I mean, it's truly one of the it is the best hybrid film with traditional cartoons ever made.
Yes, traditional animation. So, as most people should know by now, if you don't, you better check out this movie. It is one of the few collabs between the Walt Disney Company, Warner Brothers, and I think there was another smaller animation house in there too. I can't remember, but they all like faked that they were part of the Acme. But
it's a fascinating film that way. Like, there's what did Zemeckis do to make this work? I do not know.
The amount of money that went into being able to use all of these copyrighted characters.
Insanity.
But so it's an old sort of mystery spy movie where somebody dies, they're trying to figure out who done it, and a lot of the suspects are animation characters. You see a lot of behind the scenes where it's like the Fantasia, hippos and ostriches going to their sets, and then there is like the cows trying out for this scene in this show, and they made it very period. So whatever Disney was going to be producing at that time, like Fantasia, so like the late 30s, early 40s. They were making sure that they were appropriate for the animation that they were using at the time. But what makes this above and beyond is the physical interactions that happened. At this point in time, we had kind of talked a little bit about the physical interactions with like the very first movie that came out, The Enchanted Drawing. There was a passing of like a cigar, drink, all of that. Gertie the dinosaur, you gesture a little bit. You can kind of fake interactions between. I know that even in Mary Poppins with the penguins, there was, a slight interaction, like with one of them kissing her cheek. Yep. But this is the first time where you actually had like handcuffs, real legit physical handcuffs on the actor. And there was a chain hanging off of it where another handcuff that was IRL, a real handcuff, was attached to Roger. So it wasn't that it was a cartoon handcuff at that point in time, but they were actually able to pull the gags off with like real life props.
Yeah. It's the first time that, and I don't know the best way to describe this, but I think instead of like interaction, it's like almost like the toons take up volume in the real world, like from like a visual perspective. It's fascinating.
They have shadows and shading on the ground. They are colored so that way they're still cartoons, and they're but they're given depth. So you can see them as if they actually did exist in a 3D world, even though they're beloved, well-known 2D characters.
Yeah. It's fascinating, like really truly like what they're able to do in this movie. And it's become a standard for like the tech that's happened going forward. Like the things that were done on Who Framed Roger Rabbit have become like industry standard components for doing compositing and visual effects. Like it's amazing, that movie.
So it is the Cadillac.
It is the Cadillac.
And I don't think we're going to see another one quite like it ever again. No. I mean,
the amount of work alone.
The amount of work, the amount of ownership and partnership that went into this. Yeah. It was a really amazing movie. Now, there have been others that have come out since then. We'll talk about, Space Jam, which has a cult following too, and a kicking soundtrack that now I have in my head. The new Mary Poppins 2 just came out last year.
Yeah.
The year before. Oh, gosh,
Mary Poppins Returns, whatever it is. I haven't seen that one yet.
But that has, an animation section too. And so they're still creating these, but it's so much easier to do it with the current animation systems that exist, because it's all computer generated. It's easy to, even on our phones, just delete an area and be able to paste something on there. So it's not as stellar. Hey, don't mind me. My cat just moved my microphone out of the way for me.
Rude.
So if you want to get into some of the technical concepts, we definitely can. I know that we've talked a bit about like highlights of each of the big guys that I brought up, but there's so much more that comes into actually producing an animated or a hybrid movie.
Yeah, I can go through like a really abbreviated version of kind of what the basic flow would look like for a movie that from like the Mary Poppins to Who Framed Roger Rabbit era, in that kind of in that zone. Basically what they do is they take the original, so they capture all the original footage first from the live action stuff, obviously. And then what they do is they create these black and white print, like work prints, and they, I don't remember what they call it. Yeah, they call them photostats. So like this kind of like black and white reference shot that the animators can use when they start going through and, building all their animated scenes. Then they animate each independent frame like you would do with a normal animated film, where they in between and do everything just like we've talked about in traditional animation, except they build it with no background. Now, there's a lot of challenges that come along with this. So they just make these characters, and this is like in the case of like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, they create no background, and they go through and they build these characters out where they have just nothing in the background, and then they build them out, and but there's a couple of tricks with this. Now, in the case of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which I'm kind of using as like the pinnacle of this process, they had to make sure that, because the director wanted the cameras to move around. Well, there's some challenges there, because then the animators have to compensate for that, where they're able to make sure that the tune stays in the shot where it's supposed to be, even though the camera is sliding around. So they had to make sure perspective was matched and stuff like that, which is very, very complicated. So that's kind of, so they did all that. They created these non-background characters on prints and then onto cells, and then they would go through and composite these shots into the original prints of the background, the live action, and they do that with an optical printer, which is basically like a couple of projectors and a camera.
I was going to say, didn't they basically just kind of play them together and then just reshoot the film?
Basically, yeah, which is crazy because every time you do it, you degrade it a little bit. So it's the process of using the optical printer is such a huge component, because you've got these frame synced projectors and camera. And there can be as many as like 20 of these projectors, and they're all throwing images onto this one raster, onto this one cell, and then it's just being captured and played back into a new 35 millimeter negative, which is just, it's crazy. Weird. Like it's such an amazingly ridiculous thing. They're like, this will work. Yeah, this is fine, and they did it, and it works. But it's a lot of optics. It's very complicated. It's very expensive. But the craziest thing about Who Framed Roger Rabbit, it's just kind of like an extra fun note. They actually sent the prints of just the animated stuff. They sent that off with the reference shots to ILM, because ILM pops up every time you do anything that's special effects related.
There's a special effect thing involved?
Yep, and then here comes ILM every time. They actually went in then, and that's how they did that volumetric stuff. They created an entire new layer that went in with the animations and the background images that are just that volumetric lighting and shading on everything. So that was actually layered in on top, and they were able to. That's how the shadows were cast. Everything that wasn't done by the animators. Awesome. That was done by ILM. I know, it's such an amazing process, and a lot of it was just manual. There was very little they could do. And then at that point, once they had done those intermediary volumetric layering, then they would composite that in with that same composite like we were talking about, where they played all three elements: the background, the composite, the
that's just
tune
crazy.
Composite, and then the thing. Yeah, and they all ran that together, and that's what you see.
And they're so happy now that they can just go ahead and do it on computer, especially with the amount of like material that went into every single one of these. Just talking about like Who Framed Roger Rabbit alone, the amount of reels, the amount of drawings, the amount of material alone that went into this is just unfathomable.
Yeah, it's an incredible film. It's a great way to kind of capstone hybrid movies as a concept, because it does show where they were able to get to before we kind of developed into the world of CG and photoreal renderings in with stuff, which is very commonplace now. And if I was more talented, I could just do it on my editing workstation. You know, it's not even that. You don't even need that specialized.
Like I said, you can
anymore.
even do it on your cell phone nowadays. There's processes in there.
Yeah,
I mean,
so
there's a Snapchat filter out right now to add cartoon eyes to your pets. So I mean, it's become everyday household stuff that you can do. But
it's amazing to
find out how this was even thought up and then evolved. It makes the little nerd inside me happy.
Yeah. Oh yes, very much so.
Anyways, this has been WD Carousel of Podcast. My name's Crystal.
And I'm Ian.
And we hope you have a great, big, beautiful tomorrow. Bye, everybody.